Take a moment and try to picture your daily life without money. No coins jingling in your pocket, no bills in your wallet, no digital numbers on a screen representing your ability to buy food, a home, or a simple cup of coffee. For almost all of human history, that was the reality. Commerce was a complicated, uncertain dance of barter, trading your spare wool for a pot, your harvested grain for a new tool. It was a system built on immediate need and fragile agreements. But then, in a single, brilliant flash of innovation, one ancient kingdom changed everything. They created an idea so powerful, so fundamentally transformative, that its echo is the very foundation of our global economy today. This is the story of that kingdom, the Lydian Empire, and the invention that literally put the world's first currency into circulation. We are about to journey back to a land of legendary riches, where a river didn't just flow with water, but with shimmering gold dust. We will meet the ambitious kings who harnessed this natural fortune, not just to build palaces, but to engineer a complete economic revolution. They introduced the world to the concept of a coin, a small, stamped piece of metal that carried the guarantee of a king and the power to simplify trade on an unprecedented scale. This wasn't merely a convenience, it was a paradigm shift that created immense wealth and power, propelling Lydia to become history's first true economic superpower. Their story is one of dazzling innovation, of a society that reached a zenith of opulence that made their last king, Croesus, a byword for wealth for centuries to come. But like all great tales of power, this one carries a profound warning. The very source of Lydia's greatness, its incredible gold, also became the catalyst for its dramatic and sudden collapse. It's a narrative that explores the double-edged sword of progress, where monumental achievement can breed overconfidence, and where wealth can attract enemies as easily as it builds empires. This is more than just ancient history. It's a timeless lesson about economics, strategy, and the delicate balance between ambition and wisdom. So prepare to uncover the secrets of a civilization whose legacy we carry with us every single day, a story of rise and fall that holds surprising relevance for our own complex world. To understand how a single kingdom could fundamentally reshape the global economy, we must first look at the ground it was built upon. The story of Lydia's rise begins not in a palace or a mint, but with the very lay of the land. Situated in what is now Western Turkey, the heartland of Lydia was a geographic jackpot. It occupied a lush, fertile plain, shielded by mountains yet perfectly positioned as a bridge between worlds. To the west lay the Aegean Sea and the burgeoning city-states of Greece. To the east stretched the vast, ancient continent of Asia, with its established empires and untapped resources. Lydia wasn't on the periphery of anything. It was the central hub, the mandatory stopping point for anyone moving goods, ideas, or armies between these two powerful spheres of influence. This wasn't just a lucky location. It was a strategic master key that unlocked unparalleled opportunities for trade and cultural exchange. But the land offered more than just an advantageous spot on the map. It provided the essential stability needed for a civilization to flourish. The Hubris River Valley, with its rich, alluvial soil, was exceptionally productive, yielding abundant harvests of grain, grapes, and olives. This agricultural surplus was the bedrock of the Lydian state. It meant that the population could be reliably fed, freeing up labor and capital for pursuits beyond mere subsistence. A society that doesn't have to worry about its next meal can focus on crafting luxury goods, developing new technologies, and professionalizing its army. This fertile base created the stable foundation upon which extraordinary wealth could be built, turning Lydia from a simple kingdom into an economic powerhouse. Yet the most legendary of Lydia's natural gifts was something far more dazzling. Winding through this fertile land was the Pactylus River, a stream that seemed touched by the gods. Its waters carried a unique treasure, countless microscopic particles of Electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver, washed down from the mineral-rich slopes of Mount Tmolus. Unlike a deep mine that required dangerous and expensive labor to exploit, the gold of the Pactylus was literally there for the taking. Lydians developed simple but effective techniques to pan for this gold dust, sifting it from the river sands in a process that provided a constant, renewable stream of raw, precious metal. This river was more than a geographical feature. It was a natural treasury, a flowing fortune that provided the capital for everything that was to come. It was this combination: strategic location, agricultural wealth, and a literal river of gold that set the stage for a revolution not of conquest but of commerce. But a fortunate location and a river of gold do not automatically build an empire. For that, you need a leader with the vision and the will to forge that potential into power. Enter King Gyges, the man who had found the Mermnad dynasty and set Lydia on its path to greatness. His ascent to the throne around 680 BCE is a tale shrouded in legend, one so compelling that the Greek historian Herodotus immortalized it centuries later. The story goes that Gyges was a trusted guard for the previous king, Candace, who was so obsessed with his wife's beauty that he insisted Gyges hide in their bedroom to witness it for himself. The queen, discovering this violation, presented Gyges with a horrific choice: kill the king and take the throne himself, or be executed immediately for his transgression. In some versions, a magical ring that granted invisibility plays a role, adding a layer of mythic destiny to the coup. While we must separate the dramatic flourishes from historical fact, this legend powerfully symbolizes a decisive break from the old order. Whether through intrigue or battle, Gyges seized control, establishing a new royal line that would rule Lydia for over a century. What matters far more than the dramatic details of his coup, however, is what Gyges did once he held power. He was not content to simply be a king, he was a nation builder. Gyges transformed Lydia from a regional kingdom into a centralized, ambitious state. He understood that to secure his reign and expand his influence, he needed a strong, professional army, and the wealth from the Pactylus River provided the means to fund it. He began a policy of military expansion, pushing Lydia's borders outward and engaging in diplomacy and conflict with the major powers of the day. Records from the mighty Assyrian Empire to the east refer to him as Gugu of Ludu, showing that Gyges was a significant figure on the international stage, someone powerful enough to be noticed and reckoned with by one of history's first superpowers. Gyges established a crucial precedent for all the Lydian kings who would follow him. He demonstrated that a strong, centralized monarchy was the key to stability and growth. His reign set the template for a militaristic and expansionist foreign policy, proving that Lydia could not only defend its valuable assets, but could also project its power effectively. The foundation he laid was sturdy and clear. Power flowed from the king, supported by a professional army paid for by the kingdom's immense natural wealth. This combination of strong leadership, economic resources, and military ambition created a formidable engine for empire building. Gyges's legacy was not a palace or a monument, but a system, a powerful dynasty that understood the sources of its power and was prepared to use them. He turned the geographic and natural good fortune of Lydia into a political reality, paving the way for his successors to transform a powerful kingdom into a legendary empire. Flowing from the slopes of the sacred Mount Tmolus, the Pactylus River was the true architect of Lydian power, a waterway that carried not just life but literal fortune in its current. Unlike the legendary mines of other ancient civilizations, which required immense labor and deep, dangerous tunnels, the wealth of the Pactylus was right on the surface. Its bed and banks were saturated with Electrum, a stunning natural alloy of gold and silver that glittered in the sunlight. This gave the river an almost magical quality. The Lydians didn't have to discover a mine. They simply had to harvest what the mountain provided, a gift that was constantly renewed with each rainfall and seasonal runoff. This was a self-replenishing treasury, a geological phenomenon that placed an unimaginable economic advantage directly into their hands. The process of collecting this wealth was remarkably straightforward, which is part of what made it so revolutionary. Lydian workers developed simple but highly effective panning techniques. They would use shallow bowls or sheepskins, submerging them in the river's flow to capture the heavy electrum particles as the lighter sand and gravel washed away. Some historical accounts even suggest they laid sheepskins on the riverbed, allowing the gold-flecked silt to collect in the wool, giving rise to the ancient myth of the Golden Fleece. This was not an industry that demanded complex technology. It was an activity accessible to many, tightly controlled by the king, that produced a steady, reliable stream of raw, precious metal. This consistency was key. It wasn't a one-time windfall from a conquered city, but a predictable, domestic source of capital that could be factored into long-term economic and military planning. This constant influx of Electrum provided the fuel for every aspect of the Lydian state. It funded the construction of massive public works, including the formidable fortifications of their capital, Sardis, and the colossal tomb of King Alyattes, which still stands as a testament to their engineering prowess. It paid for a professional, full-time army, allowing soldiers to train year-round without needing to farm, and equipping them with the finest iron weapons and armor available. And it financed a level of luxury for the elite that became legendary throughout the ancient world, from intricate gold jewelry to lavish feasts. The river's bounty effectively removed the traditional constraints on an ancient kingdom's ambition. They were not limited by what they could tax from their agricultural surplus alone. They had a direct line to the ultimate symbol of value. But this river of gold also presented a unique and fascinating problem. Electrum, while beautiful, is an inconsistent alloy. The natural ratio of gold to silver can vary dramatically from one nugget to the next, meaning its intrinsic value was never quite fixed. A merchant receiving a payment in raw Electrum would have to assess each piece individually, a time-consuming and uncertain process that created friction in trade. This very inconvenience, born from their incredible good fortune, became the catalyst for one of the most significant innovations in human history. The challenge of standardizing this variable wealth would force the Lydians to think differently, pushing them to create a solution that would not only solve their local problem, but would fundamentally reshape how the entire world conducted business for millennia to come. The Pactylus River gave them the raw material, but it was the need to manage it effectively that sparked a financial revolution. So, we have this kingdom flush with gold dust, a bustling trade hub, and a persistent problem. The old system of barter was clunky and inefficient. How many pots equal a cow? The value changed depending on who you asked and what they needed that day. And even with their river of gold, the raw Electrum nuggets were inconsistent. One lump might be rich with gold, another mostly silver, making every transaction a negotiation and a gamble. It was a friction-filled economy, slowing down the very commerce that was Lydia's lifeblood. But necessity, as they say, is the mother of invention, and the Lydians were about to give birth to a concept that would echo through the ages. The solution they devised was brilliantly simple, yet its implications were earth-shattering. Sometime in the 7th century before the Common Era, an unknown Lydian ruler or a collective of merchants had a revolutionary thought. Instead of trading unpredictable lumps of Electrum, what if they created a standardized unit? They began taking carefully measured amounts of the metal, shaping them into uniform lumps, and then, most importantly, stamping them with an official seal. This seal, often the powerful image of a lion's head, the symbol of the ruling Mermnad dynasty, was not just decoration. It was a guarantee. It was a promise from the king that this piece of metal contained a specific weight and a certified level of purity. In that single act of stamping, they transformed a simple lump of metal into something far greater, a coin. Think about the profound shift this represented. Before, trust in a transaction was a personal matter between a buyer and a seller. Now that trust was transferred to the state. When you accepted a Lydian coin, you weren't trusting the merchant standing in front of you. You were trusting the word of the king. This was a monumental leap in social organization. It centralized economic authority and created a truly uniform medium of exchange. A coin from Sardis would hold the same value in the city's central market as it would in a remote village, and eventually in a Greek port across the Aegean Sea. This standardization was like creating a universal language for value, one that everyone could understand. The practical advantages were immediately obvious. Coins were portable. A merchant could carry a fortune in a small pouch rather than a wagon full of goods. They were durable, unlike perishable goods used in barter. And they were divisible. If something cost half a coin, you could literally cut it in half, and both halves still bore the royal mark, retaining their recognized value. This portability and divisibility supercharged commerce. It became easier to amass capital, to pay soldiers precisely, and to collect taxes efficiently. The state, by controlling the mint, gained a powerful new tool for managing the economy and funding its ambitions. The invention didn't just make trade easier, it made economic activity faster, larger, and more complex than ever before conceivable. This was far more than a mere convenience. It was a complete paradigm shift in how society managed wealth. The Lydians had effectively created the world's first official currency, moving humanity from a system based on the immediate exchange of goods to one based on abstract, state-backed value. It was a spark of innovation that ignited an economic revolution, a fire that would quickly spread from Anatolia to the rest of the ancient world. The Greeks, with their network of colonies and maritime trade, would see the immense utility of this Lydian invention and adopt it with enthusiasm, refining the concept and spreading it across the Mediterranean. From there, the idea of coinage would become inseparable from the rise of empires, funding the armies of Persia, the public works of Rome, and ultimately shaping the financial systems of the modern world. Every coin, every banknote, every digital currency balance today is a direct descendant of those first stamped pieces of Electrum from the banks of the Pactylus River. But the physical creation of the coin was only half the breakthrough. The true, world-changing genius of the Lydian system was the profound shift in trust it engineered. Before this innovation, every single trade was a personal agreement. You had to trust the person you were bartering with, trust that their goods were of good quality, trust that the weight of their metal was accurate, trust that they weren't trying to deceive you. This placed a heavy burden on individual relationships and local reputation, severely limiting the scale and speed of commerce. The Lydian royal stamp changed everything. With one press of a die bearing the lion emblem, trust was transferred from the individual to the institution. When you held that stamped Electrum lump, you were no longer dealing with just a merchant, you were holding a promise from the king himself. It was a revolutionary contract. The state guaranteed the weight and purity of that metal, and in return, the people accepted it as a reliable tool for exchange. This was the birth of state-backed currency, a concept so fundamental to our modern world that we barely even think about it, but for its time, it was a radical leap of faith in centralized authority. This new system of guaranteed value didn't just appear out of thin air. It was built on a foundation of impressive technological skill. Creating coins of consistent weight required precision scales and careful measurement. More challenging was the metallurgy involved. As we know, natural Electrum's composition is unpredictable. The Lydian minters, likely operating under strict royal supervision in Sardis, had to develop techniques to at least partially standardize the alloy. While they couldn't achieve the perfect consistency of later pure gold or silver coins, evidence suggests they may have learned to add small amounts of silver or copper to the melt to create a more uniform color and hardness, making counterfeiting more difficult and giving each coin a more familiar feel. This wasn't just crude metalworking, it was early materials science, an essential effort to make the king's guarantee a tangible, reliable reality. The challenge of Electrum's variation was, in a way, a driving force behind increasing technological sophistication. The economic impact of this standardized, trusted currency was immediate and dramatic. Think of all the friction it removed from daily life. No longer did a merchant and a customer need to spend valuable time haggling over the precise value of an irregular nugget of metal. The coin was a known quantity. This drastically reduced what economists call transaction costs, the time, effort, and uncertainty involved in making a deal. Disputes over value were minimized because the standard was set by a higher, impartial authority. This efficiency supercharged the entire Lydian economy. Markets could grow larger and more complex because people from different regions who didn't know each other personally could now trade with confidence. It encouraged specialization. A potter could focus on making the finest pots, knowing he could easily sell them for coins that could then be used to buy food, clothing, or tools from other specialists, without the need for a complicated three-way barter. This established a completely new economic order, one where value was abstracted and symbolized by a state-certified token. The coin itself became more important than the specific metal it contained. While the intrinsic value was still there, the real power was in the stamp. This allowed for an expansion of economic activity that was simply impossible under a barter system. The state could now collect taxes in a standardized form, making treasury management more predictable. It could pay soldiers efficiently, ensuring army loyalty and professionalism. Wealth could be stored, saved, and transported with unprecedented ease, allowing for capital accumulation and investment on a new scale. The Lydians had inadvertently created a powerful engine for economic growth, an engine that would soon be adopted and refined by every major civilization that followed, forever altering the relationship between people, their government, and the very concept of money. Building on the revolutionary system of coinage established by his predecessors, King Alyattes ascended to the Lydian throne and transformed a prosperous kingdom into an undisputed empire. His reign, spanning 5 decades, represents the absolute pinnacle of Lydian power, a period where economic innovation and military might fuse to create a golden age. Alyattes was the architect of this zenith, a ruler who understood that the wealth generated by the coins needed to be protected and projected with strategic brilliance. He embarked on a series of military campaigns that systematically expanded Lydia's influence, pushing its borders to encompass most of Western Anatolia. He didn't just conquer, he consolidated, securing the vital trade routes that were the lifeblood of the Lydian economy. His armies, funded by the steady stream of gold from the Pactylus River, became a professional and formidable force, ensuring that the wealth of Sardis was protected by an iron fist. Alyattes was not merely a warrior king, he was a sophisticated economic manager who refined the very instrument of Lydian power, its currency. Under his rule, the coinage system became more standardized and widespread. The royal mint at Sardis likely increased its output, and the iconic lion's head stamp became a symbol of trusted value throughout the region. This refinement boosted both domestic commerce and international trade, as merchants from Greece and the Near East could engage with Lydia using a reliable, state-backed medium of exchange. Alyattes' policies fostered an environment of unprecedented economic growth, turning Sardis into a dazzling cosmopolitan center where goods, ideas, and cultures converged, all facilitated by the smooth flow of Lydian coins. The sheer scale of Lydian wealth and ambition during this period is physically embodied in a single, staggering monument, the Tomb of Alyattes. Located just outside Sardis, this massive burial mound, known as a tumulus, is one of the largest of its kind in the ancient world. Even today, it rises over 200 feet high with a diameter of nearly a quarter of a mile. The construction of such a monument required an enormous mobilization of labor and resources, a clear statement of a king's power and a civilization's engineering prowess. It was more than a grave, it was a permanent declaration of Lydian supremacy, an artificial mountain built by man that dominated the landscape just as Alyattes' empire dominated Anatolia. The tomb stands as a silent but powerful testament to the peak of Lydian achievement, a tangible link to an age of unparalleled prosperity. This era of stability and expansion, however, contained the seeds of its own challenge. As Lydia's influence grew eastward, it inevitably bumped against the sphere of another rising power, the Lydian Empire. The two giants, both at the height of their strength, were destined to collide. The resulting conflict, a grueling 5-year war, would test the military machine that Alyattes had built and demonstrate that even the wealthiest and most powerful empire could reach its limits. The golden age of Alyattes had secured Lydia's dominance, but it also set the stage for a confrontation that would define the fate of the entire region. That river of gold flowing through the heart of Lydia accomplished far more than funding a revolution in commerce. It also built the machine necessary to protect that revolution. The incredible wealth extracted from the Pactylus River allowed Lydian kings to forge a military force that was the envy of the ancient world. In an era where many armies were seasonal militias, farmers who picked up spears after the harvest, the Lydians could afford something radically different, a professional, full-time fighting force. Soldiers in the service of the king did not need to worry about planting crops or tending to flocks. Their livelihood was paid for directly from the royal treasury, in the very coins that their economic system had created. This meant they could train relentlessly, honing their skills throughout the year, transforming them from part-time fighters into a disciplined, standing army. This financial advantage translated directly into superior equipment. While many of their adversaries might still be using bronze, the Lydian military was equipped with the cutting-edge technology of the time, iron. Iron weapons were stronger, sharper, and more durable than their bronze counterparts. Lydian infantry would have been armed with iron-tipped spears and swords, and their shields and body armor would have been of the highest quality available. A king who controlled a river of gold could outfit every soldier in his ranks with the best gear money could buy, giving them a significant tactical edge on the battlefield. But perhaps the most celebrated branch of the Lydian military was its cavalry. The Greek historian Herodotus specifically highlighted the skill and effectiveness of the Lydian horsemen. These were not just scouts or raiders, they were a core component of the army's striking power. Mounted on strong Anatolian horses, these cavalrymen could maneuver quickly, flank enemy formations, and deliver devastating charges. This combination of heavy infantry and highly mobile cavalry made the Lydian army a versatile and formidable opponent. This professional military became the essential instrument of Lydian power politics. It was the iron fist inside the golden glove of their diplomacy. The mere existence of such a well-funded force was a powerful deterrent to any neighbor who might have considered raiding Lydian trade caravans or challenging their territorial claims. The army's primary role was to project power, to ensure the safety of the lucrative trade routes that fed the kingdom's wealth, and to expand its borders to control even more resources and strategic points. Conquest was not just about glory, it was an economic strategy. Each new territory brought tribute, access to new materials, and control over more trade networks, which in turn generated more wealth to pay for the army that secured those gains. It was a self-reinforcing cycle of prosperity and power. Ultimately, the Lydian military was both a product of and the protector for the empire's immense wealth. It was born from the gold of the Pactylus, and its entire purpose was to safeguard the system that produced that gold. In a volatile region like ancient Anatolia, where empires like the Medes and later the Persians were rising, maintaining dominance required more than just economic innovation. It required the constant, visible threat of overwhelming force. The army was the necessary instrument that allowed the Lydian kings to enjoy their golden age, ensuring that their revolutionary economic system and the fabulous riches it produced would not be taken from them by a rival who understood that wealth, if not defended, is merely a prize waiting to be claimed. The relentless eastward expansion of Lydia under King Alyattes was bound to provoke a response. As the Lydian sphere of influence grew, it pressed against the borders of another burgeoning power, the Lydian Empire, centered in what is now Iran. These were two titans on the rise, each confident, well-armed, and unwilling to yield. The result was an inevitable and grueling conflict, a 5-year war of attrition that would test the limits of both empires. This was not a swift campaign of conquest, but a brutal stalemate, a grinding struggle between two armies so evenly matched that neither could land a decisive blow. The battlefields of Anatolia became a bloody proving ground where Lydian wealth and military professionalism met the formidable numbers and resilience of the Medes. The defining moment of this protracted war, and the event that has immortalized it in history, occurred during a particularly fierce battle. As the armies clashed, the sky began to betray them. Day turned to an eerie, premature night as the moon slid completely in front of the sun, creating a total solar eclipse. This was not just any eclipse. Historical accounts, most notably from Herodotus, pinpointed to a specific date, May 28, 585 before the Common Era. The event was so significant because it was reportedly predicted by the Greek philosopher Thales of Miletus, a city within Lydia's sphere of influence. Whether Thales truly forecast the event or it was a remarkable coincidence added later, the effect on the soldiers was immediate and profound. In the ancient world, such a celestial phenomenon was not a scientific curiosity. It was a direct message from the gods, an omen of immense power. The fighting ground to a halt as terror and awe swept through both ranks. The sun, the source of life and light, had been extinguished in the middle of the day. Surely this was a sign that the gods were furious with their endless, fruitless slaughter. Seeing an opportunity to end a costly and indecisive war, the commanders on both sides interpreted the eclipse as a divine command for peace. The darkness that had halted their battle became the catalyst for negotiation. King Alyattes and the Median king, Cyrus, agreed to a treaty. To seal this new peace, they employed the classic diplomatic tool of the ancient world, a royal marriage. Alyattes' daughter, Aryanes, was given in marriage to Cyaxares' son, Astyages. This union was far more than a simple political arrangement. It was a powerful symbol, binding the two royal houses together and creating a familial obligation to maintain the peace. The treaty also formally established the Halys River as the permanent boundary between the Lydian and Median empires, a clear line of demarcation that would, for a time, bring stability to the region. The outcome of the Lydian-Median War was a classic example of a draw, but it carried profound implications. On one hand, it was a testament to Lydia's military strength. Alyattes had held his own against one of the major powers of the age, proving that his professional, well-funded army was a force to be reckoned with on the international stage. The conflict demonstrated that Lydia was no mere regional kingdom but a genuine empire capable of projecting its power and defending its interests against a peer competitor. Yet the stalemate also revealed the limits of that power. For all its wealth and innovation, Lydia could not simply overwhelm a determined and organized enemy. The war ended not with a glorious victory but with a negotiated settlement, a fragile balance of power. This delicate peace, brokered under a darkened sky, would define the geopolitical landscape of Anatolia for a generation, but it was a balance that rested on a knife's edge, waiting for the ambitions of a new leader to tip the scales once more. The mantle of power passed from the formidable Alyattes to his son, Croesus, and with it, Lydia entered an era where its wealth transcended the merely economic and became the stuff of legend. Croesus did not just inherit a prosperous kingdom, he inherited an economic engine of unparalleled power, and he wielded this wealth with a flair that would etch his name into history as the very synonym for boundless riches. Under his rule, the Lydian Empire reached its dazzling, glittering peak, a period where opulence was not just enjoyed but displayed as a central pillar of statecraft. The capital, Sardis, became a global destination, a city where the air itself seemed to shimmer with the promise of gold, attracting merchants, artists, and diplomats from across the known world. Croesus understood that wealth was a form of soft power, and he deployed it with masterful effect, turning his kingdom into a beacon of cultural and economic influence that commanded respect and inspired awe from Greece to the empires of the East. Nothing better illustrates this calculated display of power than Croesus's famous relationship with the Oracle of Delphi in Greece. This was not a simple act of piety, it was a geopolitical statement. The Oracle was the most revered source of divine guidance in the ancient world, a place where kings and commoners alike sought advice on matters of utmost importance. Croesus, in a series of extraordinarily lavish donations, sought to win the favor of the god Apollo and, just as importantly, the admiration of the Greek world. His offerings were staggering. Herodotus recounts that he gave a solid gold lion, weighing nearly 250 pounds, alongside a massive bowl of pure gold and a towering silver bowl, among countless other priceless gifts. The sheer scale of these donations was unprecedented. It was a public relations masterstroke, a way of announcing to the powerful and influential Greek city-states that the king of Lydia was not merely a wealthy ruler, but a patron of the gods themselves, a figure of almost mythic prosperity. His name became a byword for fortune, so much so that the phrase "rich as Croesus" is still used today, a testament to the lasting power of his reputation. But Croesus was far more than a generous philanthropist. He was a determined imperialist who used his financial might to complete his father's work of domination. The wealth from the Pactylus River and the tribute from already conquered territories funded a final push to subdue the wealthy Greek city-states on the Anatolian coast, such as Ephesus and Miletus. This completed the consolidation of Lydia's control over western Anatolia, bringing a whole new stream of tribute and tax revenue into the royal treasury at Sardis. The empire now stood at its greatest geographical extent, its borders secure, its army invincible, and its wealth seemingly limitless. To any outside observer, and certainly to Croesus himself, the Lydian Empire appeared unshakable. It was a fortress of gold protected by a professional army and blessed by the favor of the gods. The kingdom radiated an aura of invincibility, a sense that its golden age was not a peak but a permanent plateau. This overwhelming prosperity, however, cultivated a dangerous climate of overconfidence. Surrounded by such immense wealth and military success, it became easy for Croesus and his court to believe that every challenge could be met with gold, that every problem had a financial solution. The very sources of their strength, the river of gold, the innovative coinage, the professional army, began to foster a sense of hubris, a pride that bordered on arrogance. The lesson of the grueling war with the Medes, which had ended in a stalemate brokered by an eclipse, seemed a distant memory. In the glittering halls of Sardis, it was easy to believe that the empire's power was absolute, that its judgment was infallible, and that its destiny was to rule. This unchecked confidence would soon be tested by a new force rising in the east, a force that valued strategic cunning and relentless ambition even more than it valued gold. The stage was set for a confrontation that would prove that even the most brilliant beacon of wealth could be extinguished by the cold winds of reality. Surrounded by the almost unimaginable wealth of his kingdom, King Croesus was a man at the peak of his power, yet he was also a man consumed by a growing anxiety. To the east, a new storm was gathering. Cyrus the Great, a charismatic and brilliant leader, had unified the Persian tribes and then achieved the unthinkable. He had conquered the mighty Median Empire, Lydia's old rival, and the very power with whom his father, Alyattes, had signed that famous peace treaty under the eclipsed sun. Now, the Persians were not just a distant concern. They were Lydia's new neighbors, with the Hubris River as the tense border between them. Cyrus was ambitious, his army hardened by victory, and his gaze was undoubtedly turning westward toward the legendary riches of Lydia. For Croesus, this was an existential threat. He could not ignore the rise of a power that had so easily swallowed an empire equal to his own. His immense wealth, which had always been his greatest strength, now felt like a glittering target. It was in this climate of looming dread that Croesus turned to the one source of counsel that every ancient ruler trusted in times of ultimate uncertainty: the gods. He decided to consult the most famous and respected oracle in the known world, the Oracle of Apollo at Delphi in Greece. But Croesus, ever the shrewd king, was not a man to take such things on faith alone. He devised a test. He sent lavish gifts to several major oracles, including Delphi, and instructed his messengers to ask, on a specific predetermined day, what the king of Lydia was doing at that very moment. When the replies came back, only the Pythia, the priestess at Delphi, gave the correct, astonishingly precise answer. She declared that Croesus was cooking a tortoise and a lamb together in a bronze pot. This was exactly right. The king was convinced he had found a true conduit to the divine. In gratitude, he sent a second, even more spectacular wave of gifts to Delphi: ingots of gold, statues of solid gold, a necklace and girdles of incredible value, effectively making the temple his personal patron. He had bought, he believed, the oracle's unwavering favor. Now confident in his divine connection, Croesus posed the question that would decide the fate of his empire. He asked the oracle of Delphi if he should make war on the Persian Empire. The response that came back was both clear and dangerously ambiguous, a masterpiece of divine double talk. The Pythia proclaimed that if Croesus crossed the Hubris River and attacked the Persians, he would destroy a great empire. to Croesus, surrounded by advisors who told him what he wanted to hear. The meaning was obvious. The oracle had promised him victory. It had foretold the destruction of the Persian Empire. His heart swelled with confidence. All his wealth, his powerful army, his strategic position, and now the blessing of Apollo himself. It was an unbeatable combination. He saw not a warning, but a divine sanction for a preemptive strike, a chance to crush this new rival before it could grow any stronger. This interpretation was a catastrophic error, a perfect example of hearing only what you wish to hear. The oracle's words were a riddle, and Croesus, blinded by his own hubris, solved it in the way that most flattered his ambitions. He never stopped to consider the other, far more terrifying possibility, that the great empire destined for destruction might be his own. He took the cryptic message as a green light, a signal from the heavens that his moment of triumph had arrived. With this divine assurance fueling his confidence, he mobilized his formidable army, the best that gold could buy. He led his forces east toward the Halys River, the ancient boundary that had defined the limit of Lydian power for a generation. As his troops crossed that river, they were not just stepping into Persian territory. They were stepping into a trap of their own king's making, a fateful decision that would unravel everything his father and grandfather had built. In that moment, Croesus wasn't just challenging Cyrus, he was challenging fate itself, and he was about to learn that the gods have a cruel sense of irony. The two colossal armies finally met near Tyria, a strategic fortress in Cappadocia, and the clash was everything one would expect from such powerful foes. The Lydians, with their renowned cavalry and professional infantry, fought with the discipline and confidence that their wealth could buy. The Persians, hardened by their recent conquest of the Medes, battled with the ferocity and unwavering loyalty inspired by Cyrus. The field descended into chaos, a swirling melee of spear, sword, and shield where neither side could gain a lasting advantage. By the time the sun set on that brutal day, the ground was littered with the fallen from both armies, and the outcome remained utterly unresolved. It was a bloody, costly stalemate, a draw that left both commanders assessing their losses and their next move. For Croesus, this was not the decisive victory the oracle had seemingly promised, but it wasn't a defeat either. In the conventional military logic of the age, the campaign season was drawing to a close with the onset of winter. Armies of this era typically did not fight through the cold months. They withdrew to their home territories to regroup, resupply, and wait for spring. This was the established rhythm of warfare, a pattern as predictable as the changing seasons themselves. Adhering strictly to this centuries-old playbook, King Croesus made what he believed was a prudent and logical decision. He concluded that the major fighting for the year was over. The Persians had been checked, and it was time to withdraw to comfortable winter quarters. He marched his main army back to his capital, the impregnable city of Sardis, a journey of several weeks. But he went a step further, a move that would prove to be his most catastrophic miscalculation. To save on the enormous cost of maintaining a massive standing army through the winter, he made the fateful choice to disband the majority of his mercenary forces. These were not native Lydians but professional soldiers hired for the campaign, and sending them home seemed like sound fiscal policy. It eased the burden on his treasury and allowed him to preserve his core, loyal Lydian troops for the spring offensive he was already planning. In his mind, he was simply pressing pause, following a script that every general from Greece to Mesopotamia understood. He assumed his enemy would do the same. This assumption was his undoing. Cyrus the Great was not a conventional ruler bound by tradition. He was a visionary and audacious leader who saw the world not in terms of its limitations but its possibilities. Where Croesus saw the end of a campaigning season, Cyrus saw a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The reports from his scouts confirmed it. The Lydian army was dissolving. The formidable force that had fought him to a standstill at Tyria was breaking up and heading home. Cyrus understood that military success often hinges on doing the unexpected, on shattering an enemy's assumptions. He realized that if he did not retreat to his own distant capital, but instead pursued Croesus immediately, he could catch the Lydian king before he had a chance to reassemble his full strength. It was an incredibly risky gamble. Marching an army deep into enemy territory as winter approached was fraught with peril, risking supply shortages and exposing his troops to the elements. But the potential reward, a decisive victory that could topple an empire in a single stroke, was too great to ignore. While Croesus settled into the luxurious comfort of his palace in Sardis, confident that the rhythms of war had granted him a winter's reprieve, Cyrus was driving his army on a forced march westward. He was not following the rules, he was rewriting them. The Persian army moved with a speed and purpose that defied Croesus's expectations, covering the vast distance to Lydia with relentless determination. The Lydian king's strategic retreat, a move born of convention and fiscal caution, had inadvertently turned his greatest asset, the fortified city of Sardis, into a trap. He was arriving home just ahead of a storm he didn't see coming, a storm of his own making. The very predictability that had guided his decision was about to be weaponized against him, setting the stage for a confrontation that would not wait for spring. Cyrus's decision to march through the winter was a breathtaking gamble, a move that shattered every expectation of ancient warfare. While Croesus assumed his enemy was miles away, licking its wounds, the entire Persian army was bearing down on Sardis with shocking speed. The Lydian king had barely settled back into his palace when the terrifying reports began to arrive. Cyrus was here. The plains outside the city, which should have been empty and peaceful, were now swarming with Persian soldiers. There was no time to recall the disbanded mercenaries, no time for elaborate defensive preparations. In a state of panic, Croesus did the only thing he could. He gathered every fighting man left in the city, his royal guard, his loyal Lydian infantry, and most importantly, the core of his famed cavalry, and marched them out to meet the threat head-on. He would make his stand on the open ground before Sardis, trusting in the one military asset that had always given Lydia an edge, its superior horsemen. The Lydian cavalry was legendary for a reason. Mounted on strong, agile horses and armed with lances and javelins, these riders were the shock troops of the ancient Anatolian world. Their standard tactic was a powerful, coordinated charge designed to smash into enemy formations, break their lines, and sow chaos before the infantry even engaged. It was a strategy that had brought them victory for generations. As they arrayed themselves on the plain, the Lydian horsemen must have felt a familiar confidence. They were fighting on home ground, defending their capital, and they were about to unleash their most devastating weapon upon an enemy that had foolishly marched itself to exhaustion. The stage seemed set for a classic Lydian victory, a demonstration of quality over quantity, but Cyrus was a master of psychological warfare. He knew the reputation of the Lydian cavalry, and he had no intention of fighting them on their own terms. According to the historian Herodotus, he conceived a brilliantly unorthodox plan. He ordered that the baggage train's camels be brought to the very front of his battle line. To modern ears, this might sound like a bizarre, almost comical tactic, but in the context of a 6th century BCE battlefield, it was a stroke of genius. Horses, especially those not accustomed to them, are instinctively terrified of camels. The strange, lanky appearance, the unfamiliar scent, and the odd, guttural noises they make can cause horses to panic and become completely unmanageable. Cyrus was essentially deploying a biological weapon, using the Lydians' greatest strength, their cavalry, against them. The moment the Lydians sounded the charge, Cyrus's plan unfolded with devastating effect. As the mass of horsemen thundered toward the Persian lines, their horses caught the overwhelming scent of the camels. The animals recoiled in fear, bucking, rearing, and refusing to advance. The disciplined charge dissolved into a chaotic mess of screaming horses and bewildered riders. The Lydian cavalry, the pride of the army and the key to their battle plan, was neutralized before a single spear was thrown. Seizing the moment of confusion, Cyrus gave the order for his infantry to attack. The Persian foot soldiers, who had been waiting behind the screen of camels, surged forward into the disorganized Lydian ranks. Without their cavalry to protect their flanks and disrupt the enemy advance, the Lydian infantry was quickly overwhelmed. The battle on the plains was not a long, heroic struggle, it was a rout. Croesus, witnessing his army disintegrate, had no choice but to order a frantic retreat. The survivors fled back through the city gates, which were slammed shut behind them. The mighty Lydian army had been defeated not by a more powerful force, but by a clever trick that exploited a fundamental weakness they never knew they had. The fight for the empire was now reduced to a single question. Could the legendary walls of Sardis withstand a siege? Bolted safely behind the massive, towering walls of Sardis, King Croesus likely felt a wave of relief mixed with grim determination. His army had been routed on the plain, but the city itself was a fortress unlike any other. The capital was built upon a steep, rocky acropolis, a natural citadel that rose dramatically from the surrounding valley. Its man-made defenses were equally imposing, thick walls constructed from stone and baked brick, following the treacherous contours of the cliffside. From this seemingly unassailable perch, Croesus could look down upon the Persian forces now camped around his city. In that moment, his strategy shifted from one of open battle to one of endurance. He was confident that Sardis could withstand a siege for months, perhaps even longer. He had vast stores of food and water within the walls, and most importantly, he held onto the hope that his allies, particularly the powerful Spartans from Greece, would honor their treaties and send a relief force to break the siege. All he had to do was wait. The Persians, far from their own supply lines and facing the harsh conditions of a winter campaign, would eventually be forced to retreat or weaken. Or so he believed. This confidence, however, was built upon a fatal flaw, the assumption that his fortress was truly impregnable. The cliffs were so sheer that the Lydians considered them a sufficient defense in themselves, and they had grown complacent over generations of security. No army had ever seriously threatened Sardis. This long-standing peace bred a carelessness that would prove catastrophic. The pivotal moment came not from a grand Persian assault, but from a simple, almost absurd act of human error. Herodotus tells us that a Persian soldier, positioned near the base of the Acropolis, was observing the cliffs intently, searching for any possible weakness. His patience was rewarded when he spotted a lone Lydian guard high up on the battlements. This guard had accidentally dropped his helmet, which clattered down the steep, rocky face, coming to rest on a narrow ledge partway down. Instead of reporting the loss and fetching a new one, the guard chose the path of least resistance. He was seen carefully making his way down a steep, hidden pathway, a route known only to the defenders, used for occasional foraging or perhaps as a secret exit. He retrieved his helmet and climbed back up, completely unaware that he had just revealed the city's greatest secret to its most dangerous enemy. The observant Persian soldier immediately reported his discovery to his commanders. Here was a path, however difficult, that scaled the supposedly unscalable cliffs. That very night, under the cover of darkness, a hand-picked contingent of Cyrus's best and most agile troops was assembled. Their mission was audacious and incredibly dangerous: to scale the secret path, reach the summit of the Acropolis, and find a way inside. The climb would have been treacherous, a silent, gripping ascent where one loose stone or a single cry from a sentry could mean discovery and death. But the Lydians, secure in their belief that the cliffs were their guardian, had left this section of the walls virtually unguarded. The Persian soldiers reached the top without raising an alarm. To their astonishment, they found a section of the fortifications that was completely undefended, a fatal gap in the city's vigilance. The end came with shocking speed. The Persian contingent did not have to fight their way through the streets. Instead, they simply moved to the main gates from the inside. They overpowered the few guards who were stationed there, not expecting an attack from within their own city, and threw open the massive doors. A signal was given, and the main Persian army, which had been waiting in readiness, poured into Sardis. The city, which had expected a long siege, was instead plunged into instant, chaotic street fighting. There was no time for an organized defense, no chance for Croesus to rally his troops. The legendary wealth of Lydia, the fabled gold of Croesus, was seized in a matter of hours. The Lydian Empire, which had risen to such dazzling heights of power and innovation, ceased to exist as an independent power in a single, swift, and stunning assault. The impregnable city had fallen not because its walls were weak, but because the overconfidence of its defenders had made them blind. With the fall of Sardis, the legendary king Croesus, once the very symbol of invincible wealth, found himself in chains, a prisoner of the man he had sought to destroy. His fate becomes a powerful fusion of history and myth, a story so compelling that its exact truth matters less than the profound lesson it was meant to convey. The most famous account comes from the Greek historian Herodotus, who paints a scene of dramatic, almost theatrical, poetic justice. According to this version, the victorious Cyrus the Great, perhaps wanting to make a brutal example of the defeated king or to offer a sacrifice to his gods, ordered that Croesus be burned alive on a great pyre. As the flames were lit and began to climb, the fallen king, facing a horrific and public end, had a moment of terrifying clarity. In his despair, he cried out a single name, not a curse against Cyrus, but the name of a wise Athenian traveler he had hosted in his days of glory, Solon. This cry stopped Cyrus in his tracks. Intrigued, he demanded to know why Croesus would call upon this foreign sage at such a moment. Through the smoke and heat, Croesus recounted the story. Years earlier, Solon had visited Sardis and witnessed its staggering opulence. Croesus, proud of his riches, had asked the sage who the happiest man in the world was, fully expecting to be named himself. But Solon, a man of deep wisdom, replied that no living man could truly be called happy, for fortune is fickle, and only at the end of a complete life can one's happiness be judged. He spoke of ordinary men who lived virtuous lives and died with honor, suggesting that a simple, well-lived life was more valuable than mountains of gold that could be lost in an instant. Croesus had dismissed this wisdom at the time, but now, standing on the pyre, he understood its devastating truth. His immense fortune had not brought him lasting happiness. It had blinded him to risk and led him directly to this fiery end. Hearing this story, Cyrus underwent a sudden change of heart. He himself was a man of immense ambition, building an empire that now dwarfed even Lydia's. The tale of Croesus's reversal served as a chilling warning about the transience of power and the arrogance of assuming one's good fortune is permanent. Moved by this lesson in humility and the fragility of human success, Cyrus ordered the flames to be extinguished immediately. In some versions of the legend, a sudden downpour sent by the god Apollo quenches the fire, adding a layer of divine intervention to the moral tale. Whether through royal command or heavenly aid, Croesus was spared. Herodotus then suggests that Cyrus not only allowed Croesus to live but treated him with great respect, keeping him as a trusted advisor for the remainder of his campaigns. This alternative narrative that the captured king transitioned from mortal enemy to valued counselor further reinforces the theme of wisdom gained through suffering. While historians debate the literal truth of the Pyre story, its power lies in its symbolism. It is a perfect Greek tragedy, encapsulating their core belief in hubris and the inevitable downfall that follows excessive pride. Croesus's story became a foundational parable for philosophers and playwrights, a classic example of how the gods would humble those who believed themselves beyond the reach of fate. The real fate of the historical Croesus is lost to time, but the legendary versions provide something perhaps more valuable, a timeless meditation on the nature of wealth, happiness, and the dangers of assuming that today's success guarantees tomorrow's security. His downfall was not just the collapse of an empire, but the shattering of an illusion, a lesson that would echo through the ages long after the gold of the Pactylus River had run dry. The Fall of Sardis was not the end of the Lydian story, but rather the beginning of a new and unexpected chapter. Cyrus the Great, unlike many conquerors of his era, was not a mere plunderer. He was a visionary empire builder. He understood that the true value of Lydia lay not just in the gold stacked in the treasuries of Sardis, but in the sophisticated economic machine that had produced that wealth. Instead of razing the city to the ground and moving on, he made a calculated and brilliant decision. Lydia was formally incorporated into the burgeoning Achaemenid Persian Empire as a satrapy, a province governed by a Persian official known as a satrap. This was not destruction, it was absorption. The Lydian kingdom ceased to exist as an independent power, but its people, its infrastructure, and most importantly, its financial systems, were now integral components of the largest empire the world had yet seen. The immediate prize for Cyrus was, of course, the legendary wealth of Croesus. The vast treasuries of Sardis, filled with gold coins, ingots, and exquisite artifacts, were seized and sent east to fund the Persian war machine. This infusion of capital was astronomical, providing the financial fuel for Cyrus's subsequent campaigns of conquest across Mesopotamia and beyond. In a very real sense, the gold of the Pactylus River, which had built the Lydian Empire, now financed the expansion of the Persian one. Yet, Cyrus and his administrators displayed a remarkable pragmatism. They recognized that the Lydian system of administration was incredibly efficient. Why dismantle a perfectly functioning government? The Persians largely retained the existing Lydian bureaucratic structure, the tax collection methods, and the local officials who knew how to manage the region's economy. This policy of incorporation over obliteration ensured a smooth transition of power and maintained the economic productivity of this valuable territory. Most significantly, the Persians immediately grasped the genius of the Lydian invention they had inherited: coinage. They saw that these small, stamped pieces of metal were far more than decorative wealth. They were powerful tools of control and economic integration. The Persian administration took over the royal mint at Sardis and began producing coins on a massive scale. At first, they continued to mint coins that were very similar to the Lydian lion head types, ensuring continuity and acceptance. But soon, they introduced their own iconic currency, the Persian daric. These gold coins, stamped with the image of a royal archer, the king himself, became the standard currency throughout the empire. This was a masterstroke. By adopting and standardizing coinage, the Persians could pay their armies efficiently, collect taxes uniformly, and facilitate trade across the vast distances of their domains, from the Indus Valley to the Nile. The Lydian innovation became a cornerstone of Persian imperial governance. In this way, Lydia's legacy did not die with its independence. Its most revolutionary contribution to the world, the concept of a state-backed, standardized currency, was amplified and disseminated on a global scale. The economic model perfected in Sardis became the engine for the Achaemenid Empire. The very systems that had made Lydia rich now served to enrich and stabilize a world power. The kingdom lived on not as a political entity, but as a vital economic and administrative heart within a much larger body. The Persian absorption was a testament to the enduring power of Lydian innovation, proving that an idea can be far more valuable and far more lasting than even the largest pile of gold. The conquerors had the gold, but they wisely kept the system that gave it meaning. But how can we be sure that this dramatic story of kings and coins isn't just an ancient legend? After all, the tales of Croesus and his golden kingdom have the feel of a myth. The answer lies not in dusty scrolls alone, but in the very soil of Turkey, where archaeologists have unearthed a wealth of evidence that brings the Lydian Empire vividly back to life. Excavations at the site of ancient Sardis have been ongoing for decades, and what they've revealed is nothing short of spectacular. The city was vast, a sprawling metropolis that confirms its status as a major capital. Perhaps the most thrilling discovery was the uncovering of Sardis's industrial quarter. Here, amidst the ruins, researchers found the physical remains of the Lydian economic miracle: furnaces for smelting metal, stone anvils used for hammering, and countless small clay crucibles stained with traces of gold and electrum. This was the world's first mint, the very workshop where the concept of coinage was transformed from a brilliant idea into a tangible reality that would change the world. The sheer opulence of Lydian civilization is breathtakingly confirmed by artifacts like the renowned Lydian hoard, sometimes called the Croesus treasure. This collection, recovered after a dramatic history of looting and eventual repatriation, consists of exquisite pieces of gold and silver workmanship. There are delicate bracelets, elaborate earrings, and ornate ceremonial vessels, all crafted with a sophistication and artistry that speaks volumes about the wealth that flowed through Sardis. These aren't just pretty objects, they are silent witnesses to a society that had moved beyond mere survival to a level of luxury and aesthetic refinement that impressed even their sophisticated Greek neighbors. Each piece testifies to the skill of Lydian artisans and the abundant precious metals that were their raw materials, providing undeniable physical proof of the legendary riches described by Herodotus. Yet, perhaps the most imposing piece of archaeological evidence isn't something you can hold in your hand, but something you can stand before and feel a sense of awe. Just outside Sardis stands the massive burial mound of King Alyattes, the father of Croesus. This tumulus is an artificial hill of staggering proportions, reaching over 200 feet high. The labor required to build such a monument is almost unimaginable, requiring the movement of countless tons of earth and stone by thousands of workers over many years. It was more than a tomb, it was a permanent statement of power carved into the landscape itself. The sheer scale of this structure is a direct reflection of the centralization of authority and the vast resources at the command of the Lydian kings. You can't look upon it without understanding that this was the work of a highly organized, wealthy, and powerful state. All these findings, the industrial mint, the hoards of jewelry, the colossal tomb, weave together to form a coherent picture that corroborates the historical narratives. The archaeology doesn't just confirm that the Lydians were rich, it shows us how they became rich. It connects the dots between the gold of the Pactylus River, the industrial process in the city, and the immense political power of the monarchy. This tangible evidence bridges the gap of 2,500 years, giving us a direct physical connection to the ingenious people who, in a flash of innovation, invented our economic world. They transformed the story of Lydia from a compelling fable into a documented chapter of human history, allowing us to walk the same streets and touch the same stones as the men who first held a coin in their hand. To truly grasp the world of the Lydians, we must step beyond the royal mint and the battlefield and into the bustling streets of Sardis itself. While their legacy in economics and warfare is undeniable, it was their vibrant, sophisticated culture that formed the living, breathing heart of their civilization. Imagine Sardis not just as a fortress of gold, but as a thriving, cosmopolitan hub, a crossroads where Anatolian traditions blended seamlessly with influences from Greece and the Near East. The city would have been a symphony of sounds and sights, the clamor of merchants haggling not just in Lydian, but in Greek and Aramaic, the scent of exotic spices from the East mingling with the smell of local foods, and the sight of artisans creating works of art that reflected this unique cultural fusion. This was a society that valued more than just accumulation. It valued leisure, artistry, and daily life, aspects that give us a much richer, more human portrait of the people behind the coins. Our primary window into this social world comes from the Greek historian Herodotus, who, while sometimes viewing the Lydians with a touch of cultural superiority, credited them with inventing several familiar pastimes. He claimed they were the originators of games like knucklebones, an early form of dice made from the ankles of sheep, and even suggested they invented ball games. While we might not know the exact rules of these ancient diversions, the implication is profound. It tells us that Lydian society had developed to a point where people had leisure time. It wasn't all about panning for gold or fighting wars. There was space for social interaction, play, and communal entertainment. This points to a structured society with a degree of stability and prosperity that allowed for recreational activities, a sign of a complex and advanced civilization. This cultural richness is further mirrored in the artifacts they left behind. Lydian art displays a distinctive and captivating style, a synthesis that reflects their geographic position. You can see the strong, earthy forms and motifs native to Anatolia, but layered with the emerging naturalism and decorative flair of Greek art, particularly from their Ionian neighbors. Their metalwork, especially in gold and silver, is exquisite, featuring intricate designs of animals, mythological creatures, and geometric patterns. Their pottery, while often influenced by Greek styles, has its own character, with distinctive shapes and painted scenes that offer glimpses into their beliefs and daily activities. This artistic blend wasn't mere imitation. It was a creative adaptation, showing a culture confident enough to absorb outside influences and remake them into something uniquely Lydian. At the foundation of this society was their language, a now extinct member of the Anatolian branch of the Indo-European family, related to Hittite and Luwian. Deciphering the Lydian language has been a challenge for scholars, as the surviving texts are few and often short, consisting mainly of inscriptions on coins, tombs, and pottery. Yet each fragment is a precious clue. The very fact that they had a written language, likely adapted from a Greek script, speaks volumes about their administrative needs and intellectual life. While we may never hear a Lydian poem or read a Lydian law code, the surviving words, names of gods, kings, and common objects help to anchor them in history as a real people with their own unique voice, a voice that fell silent but whose echoes are still being traced by linguists today. Their spiritual world was populated by a pantheon of gods that would have seemed familiar to a Greek visitor, yet with distinct Anatolian roots. They worshipped a sky god, often identified with the Greek Zeus, and a sun god. But the most significant figure in their religious life was the great mother goddess, Cybele. Known to the Lydians as Kuvava, she was the ancient Anatolian deity of mountains, nature, and wild animals, a powerful symbol of fertility and untamed life. Her worship was central, involving ecstatic rites and ceremonies that emphasized her connection to the natural world. The prominence of a powerful mother goddess reflects the deep, indigenous roots of Lydian culture, a spiritual connection to the very land they inhabited, long before their rise to economic prominence. This devotion to Cybele reminds us that for all their financial innovation, the Lydians were, at their core, an Anatolian people, drawing spiritual strength from the same earth that provided their material wealth. The true measure of the Lydian revolution is not found in the fall of Sardis, but in the unstoppable wave of change that rippled out from it. The concept of coinage was an idea whose time had come, and it spread with a speed and thoroughness that is difficult to overstate. The first and most enthusiastic adopters were the Lydians' neighbors, the Greek city-states of Ionia on the Anatolian coast. They saw immediately the immense utility of this new system. Maritime traders, in particular, understood that a handful of standardized, trusted coins was infinitely more practical than a ship's hold full of disparate goods for barter. From these eastern Greek cities, the technology of coinage hopped across the Aegean Sea to mainland Greece, where it found a fertile ground in the competitive, entrepreneurial culture of city-states like Athens and Corinth. These states quickly recognized that coins were not just a commercial tool but a potent symbol of their independence and identity. They began minting their own currencies, each with distinctive designs: the Athenian owl, the Corinthian Pegasus, turning money into a form of civic pride and international advertisement. This widespread adoption fundamentally rewired the ancient economy. Before coins, long-distance trade was a cumbersome affair, limited by the need to find a trading partner who not only had what you wanted but also wanted what you had, a problem known as the double coincidence of wants. Coins shattered this limitation. A merchant from Athens could now sail to Egypt, confident that the silver coins in his possession, stamped with the recognizable owl of Athena, would be accepted in exchange for Egyptian grain. This universality, this ability to act as a common language of value, drastically reduced the friction of commerce. It allowed for the development of complex, inter-regional trade networks that fueled economic specialization. A region could focus on producing what it was best at, whether wine, olive oil, or pottery, knowing it could easily trade its surplus for anything else it needed using this neutral, portable medium of exchange. The entire Mediterranean basin became a more interconnected and economically dynamic place because of this Lydian invention. Beyond trade, coinage became the lifeblood of the state itself, providing rulers with a powerful new tool for governance. Taxation, which had once been a messy process of collecting agricultural goods or demanding labor, could now be streamlined into a precise monetary system. A government could levy a tax of a certain number of coins, which was far easier to account for, transport, and store than vast quantities of grain or livestock. This efficient taxation, in turn, funded the professionalization of society's most critical functions. The most obvious example was the military. Kings and city-states could now pay soldiers a regular wage in coin. This meant armies could remain in the field for longer periods, were more loyal to the paymaster than to a local chieftain, and could be equipped with standardized gear purchased from state-controlled workshops. The rise of the professional standing army, a key feature of later empires like Rome, was directly enabled by the existence of a monetary economy. Furthermore, coins unlocked the potential for capital accumulation and investment on an unprecedented scale. In a barter economy, storing wealth was problematic. Grain could rot and livestock could die. Coins, however, were durable and non-perishable, wealth could be saved, stored securely, and then deployed for large-scale projects. This allowed for the accumulation of capital that could fund everything from the construction of massive temples and public works to the outfitting of large trading expeditions. It created the possibility of lending and borrowing on a scale that could fuel economic growth. This ability to amass and deploy financial resources was a prerequisite for the vast public works and imperial ambitions of the civilizations that followed. The monumental architecture of classical Greece and the infrastructure of the Roman Empire were, in a very real sense, built with the descendants of the Lydian stater. Perhaps the most profound legacy is the one we carry with us every day. Every single monetary instrument in the modern world, from the quarter in your pocket to the digital number in your bank account, is a direct conceptual descendant of those first stamped lumps of Electrum. The Lydians initiated the fundamental shift from wealth as a physical object to wealth as an abstract concept represented by a token. Their system established the principle of state-backed value, the idea that a piece of metal or paper has worth because a governing authority says it does, and because society collectively agrees to trust that guarantee. This concept is the bedrock of all modern finance. The entire global economic system, with its stock markets, international loans, and complex financial instruments, rests on this foundation of standardized, fungible currency. It is a staggering thought that an innovation conceived on the banks of a small river in Anatolia 2,600 years ago continues to structure every commercial transaction on the planet today, making it arguably one of the most impactful and enduring inventions in the entire history of human civilization. The dramatic collapse of the Lydian Empire presents a military case study that resonates across millennia, a stark lesson in how overwhelming material advantage can be utterly nullified by flaws in judgment. King Croesus did not fall because his treasury was empty or his soldiers were cowardly. He fell because a series of catastrophic strategic errors, born from a deep-seated overconfidence, created a cascade of failure. His first and perhaps most fundamental mistake was a profound misreading of his enemy's character. Cyrus the Great was not a conventional ruler bound by the traditional rhythms of warfare. Where Croesus saw the onset of winter as a natural pause button, a seasonal truce observed by all civilized armies, Cyrus saw a vacuum of expectation, a perfect opportunity to strike. Croesus's decision to disband his mercenary forces and retreat to Sardis was a move of conventional logic, but it was a logic that his adversary had no intention of following. This was a failure of intelligence and imagination, an assumption that his enemy would think as he did, a critical error for any commander. This miscalculation was compounded by a rigid adherence to an external and dangerously ambiguous source of guidance, the Oracle of Delphi. The famous prophecy that by crossing the Halys River he would destroy a great empire became a cognitive trap. Surrounded by the opulence of his court and the echo of his own reputation, Croesus heard only the interpretation that flattered his ambitions. He filtered the oracle's words through a lens of invincibility, never seriously entertaining the possibility that the empire destined for ruin could be his own. This over-reliance on a cryptic divine message at the expense of sober military and political analysis highlights a second critical failure, the substitution of hope for strategy. He went to war not because a clear-eyed assessment of his forces and the Persian threat suggested victory, but because he believed he had a divine guarantee. This is a perennial danger for leaders who become so powerful that they start to believe in their own infallibility, surrounding themselves with yes-men and dismissing dissenting voices. Then, on the battlefield itself, we see a third critical error, a failure to adapt to unconventional tactics. The Lydian military, for all its professionalism, was a force built on established doctrines. Its greatest strength was its cavalry, and its battle plans were likely built around the devastating charge of these horsemen. Cyrus, however, refused to fight on Lydian terms. His use of camels to spook the Lydian horses was a masterstroke of psychological warfare, a simple yet brilliant exploitation of an unforeseen weakness. It was an asymmetrical tactic that shattered the conventional battle script. Croesus and his commanders, confident in their superior training and equipment, seem to have had no contingency for such an unorthodox maneuver. They were outthought, not just outfought. This demonstrates that technological or numerical superiority means little if your enemy can change the rules of the game, forcing you to fight a battle you are not prepared for. Ultimately, the story of Croesus's defeat is a timeless parable about the limitations of wealth and the dangers of hubris. The Lydian Empire was the world's first economic superpower, a civilization that literally invented money. Its kings believed, understandably, that gold could solve any problem. It could buy the finest weapons, hire the most skilled mercenaries, and build the most imposing walls. But what gold cannot buy is strategic insight, adaptability, and humility. Croesus's wealth fostered a dangerous complacency, a belief that his resources made him invulnerable. He underestimated Cyrus because he could not conceive that a leader from a less monetized, seemingly less sophisticated society could outmaneuver him. The Lydian experience stands as an eternal warning that in the calculus of power, intangible qualities like cunning, boldness, and the ability to learn and adapt are often far more decisive than the sheer weight of treasure. It is a lesson that echoes from the plains of ancient Anatolia to the boardrooms and battlefields of the modern world, reminding us that the greatest resource any leader possesses is not in their vault but in their mind. What makes the story of King Croesus so enduring, so resonant across 25 centuries, is that it is not merely a historical event, but a fundamental human drama. It's a narrative that explores the intoxicating and ultimately dangerous relationship between immense wealth and the human ego. The Lydian Empire's incredible prosperity, flowing directly from the Pactylus River, was undeniably the engine of its rise. It built the army, funded the innovation of coinage, and created a golden age of cultural splendor. But that very river of gold also carved a deep channel of overconfidence, a conviction that financial power could solve every problem and overcome every obstacle. For Croesus, sitting atop this mountain of wealth, the world must have seemed predictable, even manageable. His gold could hire the finest soldiers, bribe the most powerful allies, and offer gifts so lavish they seemed to buy the favor of the gods themselves. This created a perilous illusion of control, a belief that the complex, unpredictable forces of geopolitics, strategy, and plain luck could be mastered with sufficient capital. This illusion is the essence of hubris, a concept the Greeks understood better than anyone. Hubris is more than just pride. It is an overweening arrogance that leads a person to defy the natural order, to believe they are immune to the fate that governs ordinary mortals. In the Greek worldview, such arrogance inevitably attracted the wrath of the gods, a cosmic correction known as nemesis. The tale of Croesus became the classic illustration of this principle for Greek thinkers like Herodotus, Solon, and later, the playwrights and philosophers. They held him up as a living lesson in the fickleness of fortune, a man who had everything a person could desire, yet lost it all because he failed to recognize the limits of his own power. His story was a warning that true prosperity is not just about the accumulation of riches, but about the cultivation of wisdom and humility to manage those riches wisely. The critical mistake was not that Croesus was wealthy, but that he allowed his wealth to become a substitute for critical thinking. He fell into the trap of believing that because he could afford a war, he should wage one. The strategic risks of confronting Cyrus, the Persians' battle-hardened army, their innovative tactics, the vast distances involved, were all rational concerns. But for a king surrounded by the glitter of his own treasury, these risks seemed diminished, manageable, even irrelevant. His decision-making process became clouded by a financial calculus that ignored the human and strategic variables. He assumed that the sheer weight of his gold would tip the scales in his favor, that his enemy would play by the same conventional rules he did. This was a catastrophic failure of imagination, a blindness induced by an overabundance of resources. This cautionary tale echoes far beyond the ancient world, finding startling parallels in every era. We see it in the collapse of giant corporations that grew so dominant they became complacent, failing to see disruptive innovations on the horizon until it was too late. We see it in the fortunes of individuals who, after achieving great success, make reckless decisions because past victories made them feel invincible. The pattern is always the same. Initial success creates a formula. That formula breeds confidence, and over time, that confidence hardens into an unshakable belief in the formula's infallibility. The environment changes, new challenges arise, but the response is simply to apply more of what worked before. More money, more force, more of the same strategy. This is the seed of downfall, hidden within the fruit of success itself. The profound lesson of Lydia is not that wealth is bad, but that it is perilous. It demands a counterbalance of introspection and humility. The most successful leaders, whether in business, politics, or any field, are often those who maintain a healthy skepticism of their own good fortune. They understand that prosperity can create blind spots, and they actively seek out dissenting opinions and uncomfortable truths. They remember that the conditions which created their success, a unique innovation, a favorable market, a specific set of circumstances, are often temporary. The story of Croesus reminds us that the ultimate test of success is not how high you climb, but whether you possess the wisdom to see the precipice from the peak. It is a timeless invitation to ask ourselves in our own pursuits whether we are using our resources as tools or whether we have become tools of our resources, mistaking the means for the end and in the process, losing sight of the very judgment that brought us success in the first place. This brilliant innovation, the very engine of their ascent, carried within it the seeds of a profound dilemma. The Lydians had unlocked a new form of power, but they soon discovered that power, once unleashed, is difficult to control and comes with unforeseen consequences. The coinage system acted like a financial amplifier, concentrating wealth and military capability in Sardis to an extent never before seen. This gave them a tremendous advantage over their neighbors, but it also fundamentally altered their relationship with the world. They were no longer just another kingdom, they were a prize. The legendary treasury of Croesus became a beacon, shining across the ancient world, and its light did not just attract admiring traders. It also drew the attention of ambitious rulers who saw that wealth not as a marvel of economics, but as a resource to be captured. The very tool that built their fortress of gold also painted a target on its walls. This phenomenon, where a solution creates a new, often more complex set of problems, is what we might call the paradox of progress. The Lydians solved the problem of inefficient barter, but in doing so, they created the problem of being the richest, most tempting target in the region. Their economic innovation gave them a short-term advantage, but it also set in motion long-term geopolitical forces that they were ultimately unprepared to manage. This is a pattern that repeats itself throughout history. Consider the invention of the castle. It solved the problem of defense against raiding parties, creating safe havens for medieval communities. But the concentration of people and wealth behind those stone walls also made them the primary objective for larger, more organized armies and sophisticated siege engines. The solution to one threat inadvertently created a more formidable challenge. We see this duality echoed in more modern times. The Industrial Revolution solved immense problems of production and transportation, lifting millions out of agrarian poverty and creating unprecedented material wealth. Yet it also introduced new vulnerabilities, sprawling cities dependent on complex supply chains for food and energy, and the existential threat of industrial-scale warfare. The Internet solved the problem of information access and global communication, connecting humanity in ways previously unimaginable. But it also created new vectors for cyber attacks, the erosion of privacy, and the rapid spread of misinformation. In each case, the groundbreaking innovation that provided such immense benefits also opened up a new frontier of risk and potential instability. The advantages are immediate and obvious. The vulnerabilities often emerge more slowly, hidden in the shadow of the initial success. For the Lydians, the most direct consequence was a dangerous over-reliance on their single greatest asset. Their entire society, from its luxurious court to its professional army, was built upon the steady flow of gold from the Pactylus River. This created a kind of strategic brittleness. When your power is derived from one primary source, you become exceptionally vulnerable to any threat to that source. The Lydian economy, for all its sophistication, was not diversified. It was a gold-based monoculture. This meant that their strategic thinking became narrowly focused on protecting and expanding that golden stream, perhaps at the expense of developing deeper diplomatic alliances or more flexible, adaptive forms of power. They became, in a sense, a prisoner of their own wealth, forced to constantly defend it, which inevitably led to a more aggressive and expansionist foreign policy that bred resentment and fear among their neighbors. Ultimately, the Lydian story teaches us that innovation is not a one-time event with a fixed outcome. It is the beginning of a new, more complex game. Mastering the invention itself is only the first step. The greater challenge lies in foreseeing and managing the second-order effects, the ripple to truly grasp the revolutionary nature of what the Lydians accomplished. We need to step back and see how their economy contrasted with the other great civilizations of their time. The ancient world was dominated by powers whose wealth was rooted in the land itself. Think of Egypt, the gift of the Nile. Its phenomenal power was built on an agricultural surplus so vast and reliable that it could feed a massive population and support a god-king pharaoh. The Egyptian economy was a masterpiece of central planning, a tribute-based system where grain, livestock, and labor flowed from the villages to the state warehouses to fund monumental projects like the pyramids. Wealth was measured in bushels of wheat and the number of subjects who could be mobilized for corvée labor. Money, as the Lydians would conceive it, was unnecessary. The state's power was its ability to commandeer resources and people directly. Similarly, the empires of Mesopotamia, like the Assyrians, operated on a model of conquest and extraction. They subjugated neighboring regions and demanded tribute in the form of raw materials, timber, metals, and agricultural goods, which were then stockpiled in the royal capital. Power was about controlling territory and the tangible resources that territory produced. Then there were the Phoenicians, a civilization that, on the surface, might seem like a closer parallel to Lydia. These master sailors of the Levant were the great merchants of the Mediterranean, establishing trade networks that stretched from the Levant to Spain and even beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Their wealth came from commerce, from transporting luxury goods like Tyrian purple dye, glass, and cedar wood across the seas. They were brilliant facilitators of exchange. Yet, despite their commercial prowess, they never developed a standardized coinage system. Their transactions were likely based on weighed amounts of precious metal, often in the form of ingots or rings, which required careful assessment and scales for every single trade. This was a step above pure barter, but it still lacked the efficiency and state-backed guarantee of the Lydian coin. The Phoenician model was about moving goods. The Lydian model was about moving value itself in a standardized, portable, and universally recognizable form. This is what makes Lydia's achievement so unique and so transformative. They were the first to build a state whose primary source of power was not vast farmland or a sprawling tributary empire, but a monetized economy. Their strength was not just in what they owned, but in the system they created to facilitate exchange. While Egypt's pharaohs demonstrated their power by building tombs of stone, the Lydian kings demonstrated theirs by inventing a new language of value. This focus on currency rather than just commodities gave them a different kind of leverage. It allowed for a more fluid and dynamic economy. A Lydian merchant could quickly convert a transaction into a handful of coins, which could then be easily stored, transported, or reinvested. This liquidity, this ease of converting effort into abstract value, accelerated economic activity in a way that was impossible in the cumbersome, goods-based systems of their rivals. The rapid adoption of coinage by other cultures, especially the Greeks, is the ultimate testament to the superiority of the Lydian model. The Greek city-states, with their rocky terrain and limited agricultural land, could never hope to compete with the agricultural output of Egypt or the resource extraction of Mesopotamia. But they were fiercely independent, entrepreneurial, and heavily engaged in trade across the Mediterranean. When they encountered Lydian coins, they immediately saw the potential. Here was a tool that perfectly suited their needs. It allowed them to pay for imported grain, fund their navies, and collect taxes with unprecedented efficiency. They adopted the technology with enthusiasm, and in doing so, they leveled the playing field. A small city-state like Athens, with its rich silver mines, could now project power and influence far beyond what its size would suggest, all because it could mint owls, the trusted silver coins that became the dollar of the ancient world. The Lydian invention democratized economic power, enabling states without massive land-based resources to compete on the global stage. It was an idea whose time had come because it was simply a better, more powerful way to organize an economy, a system so effective that it would become the indispensable foundation for every empire that followed. But even the most generous gifts of nature are not boundless. The legendary Pactylus River, which had flowed with the shimmering promise of Electrum for generations, could not sustain its miraculous bounty forever. The very method that made the Lydian fortune so accessible, the simple process of panning for gold dust washed down from the mountain, contained the seeds of its own demise. These were what geologists call placer deposits, superficial concentrations of heavy minerals that are relatively easy to extract. For decades, perhaps even a century or two, the Lydians and their successors harvested this easily won wealth. But placer deposits are, by their nature, finite. The mountain could only shed so much gold-bearing rock over time, and eventually the riverbeds and sands that had been so rich were picked clean. The era of simply dipping a bowl into the water and pulling out a fortune came to a quiet, inevitable end. The source of Lydia's power did not vanish in a dramatic collapse. It gradually faded, its golden sparkle dimming with each passing year until the river ran clear, its treasure exhausted. The story of the Pactylus, however, did not end with the Lydians. The memory of its wealth lingered, a powerful legend that attracted the attention of every subsequent power that controlled the region. The Persians, who had conquered Lydia for its gold, would have continued to work the river as long as it yielded a return. Later, when Alexander the Great swept through Anatolia, his successors, the Seleucid kings, undoubtedly probed the area for remaining riches. But the most significant later effort came from the Romans, masters of engineering and large-scale extraction. They understood that the easy gold was gone from the river itself, but they knew it had to have come from somewhere. Their attention turned from the riverbed to the source, the quartz veins embedded deep within Mount Tmolus itself. Roman mining was a far more brutal and industrialized affair than the Lydian practice. It involved tunneling into the mountain, using fire to fracture the hard rock, and then crushing the quartz ore with massive hammers operated by slave labor to free the tiny particles of gold. This was no longer a graceful harvest from a flowing river. It was a violent assault on the earth, a testament to the enduring thirst for the metal that had built an empire. Yet, even Roman engineering and determination could not restore the Pactylus to its former glory. Mining hard rock quartz veins is exponentially more difficult, dangerous, and expensive than washing placer deposits. The costs of such deep mining operations often outweighed the diminishing returns, especially as the Romans accessed easier-to-reach gold sources in other parts of their vast empire. The work on Mount Tmolus likely continued sporadically, but it never again produced wealth on the scale that had fueled the Lydian Golden Age. The mountain, which had once seemed to offer its treasure so freely, now guarded its remaining secrets with stubborn resilience. The age of effortless wealth was irrevocably over, replaced by a much harder struggle for diminishing returns. Today, if you were to visit the site, you would find a landscape that tells this story of rise and fall in its very geology. The Pactylus River is now a modest stream meandering through the Turkish countryside. Its waters are clear, and its sands are just sand, holding no glint of Electrum. The slopes of Mount Tmolus, known today as Bosdag, show the scars of ancient endeavor's old trenches and the faint remains of mining works that are slowly being reclaimed by nature. Standing there, it is a powerful, almost philosophical experience. The river that once fundamentally altered the course of human economics is now a quiet, unassuming trickle. Its transformation from a legendary river of gold to an ordinary waterway is a silent but profound testament to the finite nature of all natural resources. No matter how abundant a gift may seem, it is never truly endless. This physical depletion serves as a powerful metaphor for the larger Lydian story. The exhaustion of the Pactylus mirrors the fate of the empire it built. The wealth was real and transformative, but it was also transient. It created a brilliant, innovative, and powerful civilization. Yet that civilization, in its reliance on that single, depleting source, also contained the vulnerability that led to its downfall. The river's end reminds us that an economy built overwhelmingly on a non-renewable resource is living on borrowed time. It is a lesson that resonates deeply in our own world, where the management of finite resources like oil, minerals, and fresh water is one of the defining challenges of our age. The Pactylus teaches that the most sustainable forms of prosperity are not those extracted from the ground, but those built on enduring human innovations like the very concept of currency the Lydians invented, an idea that, unlike the river's gold, would never run dry. It's a stunning thought that the financial debates we have today about the nature of money, the risks of resource dependence, and the role of government in the economy were being tested in their most primitive form over 2,600 years ago. The Lydian system, for all its ancient origins, established a foundational principle that is absolutely central to our modern world, the concept of fiat currency. When King Alyattes stamped that lion's head onto a lump of Electrum, he was doing something radical. He was declaring that the value of that object was not solely in the metal itself, but in the trust and authority of the state that issued it. Yes, the Electrum had intrinsic worth, but the royal stamp added a layer of guaranteed value that made it far more useful than a raw nugget. This was a crucial step away from a world where money was simply a weighed commodity, like gold dust or silver bars, and toward a world where money is a token of trust. This idea that the value of currency is backed by the full faith and credit of a governing authority, not just by the material it's made from, is the very bedrock of every modern economy. Every dollar bill, every euro, every digital entry in a bank account is a direct descendant of that Lydian guarantee. We accept these pieces of paper and strings of code as payment because we trust that our government stands behind them, that they will be accepted by others, and that they represent a claim on real goods and services. The Lydians were the first to make that profound leap of faith, moving humanity from a system of commodity money to a system of representative money, paving the way for the purely fiat systems we use today. This ancient innovation puts a fascinating historical perspective on one of the most enduring economic debates: the gold standard versus fiat money. Proponents of the gold standard argue that money should be tied to a tangible asset to prevent governments from irresponsibly printing currency and causing inflation. They look back to a time when paper money was directly convertible into gold, seeing it as a discipline on state power. But the Lydian experience shows that even the earliest coins were already a move away from a pure commodity standard. Their Electrum coins had a variable gold and silver content, meaning their intrinsic value was inconsistent. The real value was in the stamp, the state's promise. In a way, the Lydians were grappling with a hybrid system, and their success demonstrates that the trust placed in a state's guarantee can be a more powerful economic tool than the mere weight of a metal. Their system worked because people believed in the stability and authority of the Lydian kingdom. This ancient lesson echoes in our modern world. When that trust erodes, as it does in periods of hyperinflation or political instability, even the most beautifully printed currency becomes worthless. The value of money, as the Lydians discovered, is ultimately a social contract, a collective agreement that is far more fragile and far more important than the paper or metal it's printed on. Beyond the nature of money itself, the rise and fall of Lydia offers a stark, timeless case study in the perils of a resource-dependent economy, a lesson that resonates powerfully with modern petrostates. Lydia was history's first true gold state. Its incredible wealth, its military power, and its cultural prestige all flowed directly from the Pactylus River. This single resource was the foundation of everything. For a time, this was an enormous advantage, creating a golden age of prosperity, but it also created a profound vulnerability. The entire Lydian economy and political system became oriented around the extraction and management of this one resource. This is a pattern we see repeated today in nations whose fortunes rise and fall with the price of oil. Just as Lydia became a target for the Persian Empire because of its famous wealth, resource-rich nations often find their natural bounty attracts unwanted attention and can even lead to the resource curse, where wealth leads to corruption, inequality, and conflict rather than broad-based development. The Lydian economy was not diversified, it was a monoculture built on gold. When Croesus faced a crisis, his strategy was to throw more gold at the problem, hiring more mercenaries, buying more alliances. He failed to see that strategic cunning and diplomatic ingenuity could be more valuable than all the treasure in his vaults. His over-reliance on his primary asset blinded him to other forms of power and made his empire strategically brittle. This leads to the most crucial lesson for modern economic policy: the indispensable need for diversification and strategic foresight. The Lydians mastered the art of creating wealth from a single source, but they failed to build an economy that could withstand the depletion of that source or the geopolitical shocks it inevitably attracted. A modern, resilient economy cannot be built on a single pillar, no matter how strong that pillar seems. It requires a diverse base, a mix of agriculture, industry, technology, and services so that if one sector falters, others can support the whole structure. Furthermore, the Lydian story is a warning about the danger of economic overheating and complacency. The constant influx of gold likely inflated prices and created a lavish court culture that was disconnected from the strategic realities of a changing world. Croesus and his advisors, surrounded by such opulence, grew overconfident. They failed to invest in long-term strategic intelligence about rising powers like Persia. They failed to build deep, lasting alliances based on mutual interest rather than mere payment. They managed the treasury brilliantly but failed at grand strategy. The echoes from Sardis tell us that true economic strength is not just about accumulating capital. It's about wisely deploying that capital to build a resilient, adaptable, and forward-looking society. It's a lesson for investors about diversifying their portfolios, for businesses about innovating beyond their core product, and for nations about building economies that are robust enough to thrive even when their most valuable resource runs dry or falls out of favor. The Lydians gave us the coin, but their downfall offers an equally valuable gift, a cautionary tale about the wisdom required to manage the prosperity that coin can create. And so, the legacy of the Lydian Empire is far more than a tale of ancient kings and fallen cities. It is a story that speaks directly to the core of our modern existence. Every time we slide a card through a reader, tap our phone to pay for coffee, or watch the dizzying numbers on a stock market ticker, we are participating in a system whose fundamental principles were first hammered out on the banks of the Pactylus River. The Lydians gifted us with a concept so powerful it became invisible, the very air our global economy breathes. They transformed value from a physical object you could hold into an abstract idea you could trust, a leap of imagination that built the modern world. Their rise stands as a timeless testament to human ingenuity, a reminder that a single spark of innovation can illuminate the path of progress for centuries. Yet, their dramatic fall serves as an equally powerful caution, a sobering lesson in the delicate balance required to wield great power. The Lydians mastered the art of creating wealth but ultimately stumbled in the art of managing its consequences. The river of gold that built their empire also fed a current of overconfidence that swept them toward disaster. King Croesus's fate is the ultimate parable for this duality. He is a figure forever suspended between two realities, the king of legendary riches and the prisoner who learned that fortune is fickle. His story warns us that success can build a palace of assumptions, blinding us to the shifting tides outside our walls. It teaches that prosperity without wisdom is a shaky foundation, and that no amount of gold can buy the foresight and humility needed to navigate an unpredictable world. This ancient narrative holds up a mirror to our own time, reflecting challenges that feel strikingly contemporary. The Lydian experience with a single resource economy echoes in the dilemmas faced by modern nations reliant on oil or other finite commodities. Their story asks us to consider the sustainability of our own systems and the wisdom of placing all our bets on one form of wealth. The paradox they faced, that their greatest innovation also created their greatest vulnerability, is a dynamic we see playing out today with technologies like the internet and artificial intelligence. These tools offer incredible benefits, yet they also introduce new risks and ethical quandaries, forcing us to confront the same essential question: can we harness the power of our creations without being undone by them? The sands of the Pactylus River have long since lost their golden sparkle, but the lessons they hold have only grown more valuable with time. The rise and fall of Lydia is not a closed chapter in a history book. It is an ongoing conversation about power, responsibility, and the human condition. It reminds us that true progress is not measured by the height of our towers or the size of our treasuries, but by the depth of our understanding. As we continue to invent and build, to shape economies and societies, the echoes from Sardis urge us to pair our ambition with wisdom, to balance our confidence with caution, and to never forget that the most enduring legacy is not written in gold, but in the lessons we learn about how to live with the power we create.